The topic is everything you need to know about volunteer recruitment and engagement. And for those of you that have never been on one of our webinars before, my name is Gung, kind of like Gung Ho, that's easier to remember. I'm the CEO and co-founder here at Civic Champs. You can see a little bit about me, some of the logos of sort of my past experience. So I went to Michigan State University as an undergrad, went to Harvard Business School later on for my graduate studies, and then largely worked in in industry with consulting or at tech companies that I co-founded. One was called Rent Jungle that did apartment search as an example. But we launched Civic Champs in 2019, about 5 years ago, and so have been super excited to be in the sort of nonprofit space. Working with you all as volunteer managers. Volunteering is obviously very dear to me, and so it's been an awesome journey thus far. But a couple other logistics for today, just so folks know, we're going to be sending out the slides from today along with the recording. And so, yeah, no need for copious notes. The presentation itself will be 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll do some Q&A. And then if you have questions or thoughts, please do put those in chat. I'll try to catch them if I can, if I see them coming up. But otherwise, we'll come back to them at the end for Q&A. Right? Awesome. And then, yeah, so for today, this is sort of the agenda. Where first we're going to kind of set the scene a little bit, right? Just talk about like, why is this topic important? Then we're going to talk about how to create an effective recruitment strategy. And then from strategy, we're going to go down to the tactical level, right? To talk about some of the tactical practices, both in terms of recruiting, but also engagement. And then we'll do a wrap up. And so we have some freebies at the end that we're going to share and talk about. And so please do stay till the end and you'll sort of get to see what those are. Alrighty. So setting the stage. And so this is a little bit old. This is about a year old now. So this is from Volunteer Probe from Toby Johnson. And so I've been refreshing to see if she has the latest and greatest, but my guess is the message is going to be pretty consistent since that it's been pretty consistent for the last 8 years as well, which is to say that recruitment for volunteer managers and volunteer coordinators is the #1 challenge that they cite, right? She does this survey. I think it has like 1,600 respondents, volunteer managers across the country and even globally. And 33% of folks said, recruitment in 2023 was their #1 sort of challenge that they're facing. And that's actually been really the #1 thing for 7 out of the 8 years that she's done this. And so I'd be surprised if her 2024 report says anything different, right? The other part of setting the stage is that on the good news side, and we talked about this in our last webinar too, last week, is volunteering is back, right? The people are excited to volunteer. There's a lot of people looking for opportunities. This is what you're looking at right now is the Google search trends for the phrase volunteering opportunities near me, right? This is just the number of people that are searching for this. And you can see, right, on the left, this is April of 2019, right? It really dipped here, right? Sort of during the pandemic, sort of really suppressed, shot back up here again, and then has been really kind of growing pretty steadily. And if you look at the peaks here on the right, this is from, March and April of this year, right? Those are all higher than anything we saw in 2019 or at the same time, right? And so we're not only back, but actually higher than ever, really. And that's been supported by a number of other studies. And so if you want to see that, you can check out our webinar from last week, and that'll be linked here as well for you all in the slides that we share. And I see that Chloe's also sharing the link here on the right. So now the other part of setting the stage, right, is really thinking about, okay, while volunteering's back, recruitment's still the #1 challenge. And so what do we do about it, right? And so one of the sort of thought leaders in the space, some of you might be reading his blogs as well, Rob Jackson, who's across the pond from us. But I really loved this quote in this article that he wrote where he said, oftentimes what you're told in terms of recruitment and retention is that one, you need to work harder, right? at what we've done before, do more of the same, but just with more intensity and vigor and frequency. The second thing, right, is crafting new recruiting. Maybe it's your messaging, right? And maybe we have something like eye-catching will catch people's attention and stand out from the pack, and then they'll come and we'll get more volunteers that way, right? And the third is finding ways to seek more people, right? And so maybe we're going to do a large-scale recruitment campaign, attending recruitment fairs, finding new sites for posting, signing up with different recruitment websites, etc. And so he has a great point, which is this is what we're often told, right? But the world has changed, and these are all his words, right? The world has changed, and so must we. And so I'll just kind of continue to read, right? Because if the roles we want volunteers to do aren't flexible and impactful enough, then however well crafted and fancy looking our recruitment campaign is, we will struggle to engage new volunteers. If we're not prepared and set up to be flexible, to let volunteers take a break, to switch roles, to walk away, then our retention efforts will stall and likely fail. We keep volunteers by being open to letting them go, not hanging onto them for dear life. Right? And so I thought that was like a really powerful and just like a different way of thinking about this that I hadn't really seen before. And I thought, really resonated with me. And so, how do we put, sort of Rob's words into action? And so as we think about a strategy, and what he says, right? So we're often told to work harder, do messaging that grabs attention, find more recruitment channels, right? And really, I would argue that maybe, right? Obviously, the first one's a little obvious, like work smarter, right? But instead of messaging that grabs attention, think about messaging that resonates, right? Instead of finding more recruitment channels, actually maybe paring down and recruiting the right channels and the right candidates. And so we're going to dig into this a little bit in terms of the details. And so here are sort of 5 steps that we would say, to build your volunteer recruitment strategy, right? And we're not going to dig into all 5 of these, but we'll highlight, 1, 2, and 4 today. So the first one is targeting the right candidates, right? Instead of like sort of spreading out your message to everyone and just, come one, come all, right? Whoever it is, but really identifying who are the right candidates for you. The second is understanding what matters to your volunteers, speaking their language. The third is meeting your ideal volunteers where they are, right? So offering those opportunities that Rob talks about, right? So whether that's virtual volunteer, whether that's micro volunteering, right? Just like different things that people can do. Number 4 here is providing enough details up front, right? So task descriptions, like this is a little tactical, right? Schedule availability. And then number 5 is asking more for referrals, right? Volunteering is more fun with friends. And so the first 2 we're going to spend the most time on, right? And that was a little feedback that we got last week is, hey, could we really dive in on some of these topics, right? Instead of talking about them at a higher level. And so we're going to share here in the chat and afterwards, right, this template for you. But this idea is identifying who is the right volunteer persona. Who are your best volunteers, your ideal volunteer profile that you're going to be creating, right? And so the way to do this, we have sort of a 7-step process here, right? The first step is listing down your best volunteers. And I would encourage people to think about like really 3 to 5 of them, right? Like who, and write down their names on this sheet of paper, right? So you can, and what I would do is probably write them, left to right, and just put them kind of in columns, right? So if you could put 3 columns or 5 columns, right? You write down their names. And then in box 2, right, is analyzing those best volunteers and identifying like what makes them your best volunteers. Is it just that they're very consistent, right? Is that because they listen well to directions? Is it like what is it that makes them the best volunteers in your eyes? Maybe they find other people for you. Maybe it's because of their skill set, right? Whatever it is, right? Write that list down for each of these, your favorite volunteers or your best volunteers, right? And then similarly on, in the template, we'll have, sort of box 3 is identifying a a list of your challenges, right, for your volunteers as well. Like, what is it that they find challenging, right? So both their attributes, but also thinking through like, hey, what is it that sort of prevents them, right, from maybe being or what is it that they find challenging being a volunteer, I guess, right? Is it because they live kind of far away, or is it they were originally, at least maybe not now, but before, worried about the time commitment, right? What are all those type of things as well, right? And then finally, right, once you're done, taking some time and reviewing, what you've written down, and almost like a word cloud, right? Identifying the things that are kind of consistent across your best volunteers, right? What are some of the consistent attributes, maybe consistent concerns, right? And then from that, you can start to segment and create, maybe it's just one segment. Maybe all your best volunteers all sort of fit the same mold, but it could be that you actually have more than one segment, right? And as an example, it could be that one of our first pilot customers that we worked with, they're an organization called My Sister's Closet. And so it's a thrift shop. And for them, they have really two groups of volunteers. They have their regulars, right? Largely retirees. And then they have lots and lots of college students. I would say it's, one of the organizations that does a fantastic job of recruiting college students, right? And if you had them write their sort of ideal volunteer profiles, they would probably create at least two segments here. One around those college students, like which of those college students are their best ones. And then a second group that's like which of these sort of regulars are their sort of best volunteers, right? And so what you end up with is maybe something like this, right? And you can, you don't have to make it pretty in the same way, right? But from a communication standpoint, it's good to have something put together that then you can actually share back with your team, right? And say, hey, this is our ideal volunteer profile, or here's a couple of them segments. Here's an example, right? And you can use a fake name or a real name, right? And so Jade Rose, is 23, recent college grad, graphic designer, lives here locally. And her story is, she recently graduated. She volunteered a lot in high school, but she's nervous about going by herself, right? She's motivated because she wants to be more engaged now that COVID has calmed down, and she enjoys taking part in social justice movements and standing up for what she believes in. And some of this, if you don't know the answer, right, ask your volunteer, right? Ask those, best volunteers or your favorite volunteers, what is it, if you don't know these things, ask them, what are their motivations? What are the things that, that make them excited to be your volunteer? And, in this case, Jade's goals are to make a positive impact in the world, regardless of how small. She wants to make more friendships and connections. And then she wants to volunteer consistently with an organization, right? And then up here, right, this is optional, right? And maybe like too graphically pretty here, right? But you could have something that thinks about those attributes that you collected, right? And you say, hey, if I were to think about the attributes that we really want, we want someone that's maybe more extroverted or less extroverted for different roles, or what makes them good, right? Maybe we really want someone that's like very open or conscientious, and you can kind of think about like how that might fit into your volunteer profile. So that was a lot to take in. Again, feel free to put down any questions in the chat, and happy to sort of address that or circle back. All right, so that's sort of the first section, right? Identifying ideal customer profiles. And then the second thing we have is really around, can we, instead of creating messaging that's gonna sort of capture attention, really thinking about recruitment messages and refining your message around language that resonates with your volunteers or your prospective volunteers. And this exercise in many ways is very similar to the persona, and that's why we put them together, but it's a little bit different. And this idea, the sort of the term is called language market fit, right? And so language, and then the market is really your volunteer, right? So we could also call it language volunteer fit. But this idea is to interview some of your most recent volunteers that have just joined your organization, right? Ideally, you want the recent ones because they're gonna remember more clearly why is it that they joined. And what you're going to ask them, and it's pretty open-ended, right? Is you ask them like, what were your goals? How did you find us? What were you looking for as you were looking for volunteer opportunities? Why us? What caught your attention? What was it that about our organization that we're excited about? And it's interesting what the answers are. But this exercise focuses, like the name says, on the language they use, the very specific words, right? And so you really want to listen hard. And it's not just like, oh, they said this, and you sort of summarize it, but what specific word that they use to describe your organization, right? What specific words they use to talk about their goals and struggles and all those things. Because what you'll find is that the words matter, right? Obviously, and they're going to be different than what maybe your organization has been using in the past and what's on your website, what's on your social media posts. And so I'll give you guys an example of Civic Champs personally. And so we, of course, we have to eat our own dog food, so to speak. And so we did this exercise ourselves with you all, really. And when we asked a bunch of volunteer managers and volunteer coordinators, like, hey, what are you looking for when you're looking for volunteer management software? What excites you? What about us? How did you find us? Why did you join? Et cetera, et cetera. And what we found is, as an example, is we always talk about Civic Champs as a volunteer management software or a platform. But oftentimes, when we asked volunteer managers, volunteer partners, they described us and our competitors and what they're looking for as a volunteer database, right? And so the word database was nowhere to be found on our website. And if you know anything about Google, right, if you don't have the word on there, well, you're not going to show up on the search results. So if someone types like volunteer database, Civic Champs would never show up because Google says, well, clearly you're not a database because you never mentioned the word database. And so that was a really interesting insight for us. And so we started to put in the word database on our website here and there a little bit, just to make sure that, because that's a language our audience or our customers use. And so in your case, what is the language that your volunteers use specifically to describe you and talk about you and so on, right? So that's kind of step one. And that in itself, I think, has a huge amount of benefits. And the second piece, right, is then to draft some headlines, right, around this, sort of little taglines, if you will, right? Like taking the words that they given you and say, okay, now if I use their words, how would I describe our volunteer program, right? And writing, 2, 3, 4 of these sort of like potential headlines. And then the first step is to test for comprehension, right? So not necessarily with your existing staff members or volunteers, but somebody that doesn't know anything about you, right? Ideally, maybe your 5-year-old or somebody else, and say like, you read them your headline and you say, does that make sense? And have them play back to you. Like, what did I say to you? What does that mean? And see if they comprehended what you were trying to communicate. And if they don't, then you have to, make your tweaks, right? And the last thing, last but not least, right, is you can test, right, using Google Ads to see, different messaging and, which ones actually resonate the most, right? And because nonprofits get free Google Ads, right, you could do this kind of for free. But this part, I think, is optional for the most part. If you just do 1 through 3, you're going to get, the sort of the 80-20 rule, right? You're going to get 80% of the way there. And so we'll go through in a little bit more depth here per folks, feedback for us. And so we're going to take a look at maybe some examples, right? And so we, imagine you're with a animal shelter and you go talk to your volunteers, right? And this might be some of the answers they provide. right? Maybe somebody says, hey, what is your goal when volunteering with us? And they say, oh, well, I want to provide compassionate care and support for animals waiting for adoption and da da da, right? Maybe another person says, I want to ensure the well-being and comfort of animals in shelter environments, right? Facilitate successful adoptions by matching animals with loving homes. I want to promote responsible pet ownership and educate the community, right? I want to maintain a clean and safe environment for animals and volunteers. I want to collaborate with local animal welfare organizations to maximize resource and support. And so again, if you only have one interview, it's less helpful, right? It's really when you get to kind of, let's say, your fifth, sixth, or seventh is when you start to see that through line, and you see, hey, this is now where I could see how we talk about it and how they talk about it being a little bit different, right? And again, new volunteers are relatively better for this exercise because they haven't been indoctrinated, right? They haven't adopted your words and your usage because everyone wants to fit in. And so when they first join, one of the things they're going to do is they're going to say, oh, I use volunteer database when I talk about, but they use software, so I'm going to call it a software going forward, right? But that's less helpful for you. What you want to know is before people join, what are the words they use, right? All right. And then so maybe struggles, you can ask about struggles, like what is it that uh, these new volunteers, maybe things that they struggle with, or maybe things that they were looking for, right? Or things that are hindering them from, or they thought were going to hinder them, right? It might be emotional challenges, time constraints, physical demands, limited resources, et cetera, et cetera. And so these might be, again, sort of highlighting different words. And we'll circle back to this piece of it. This you're not going to have in your headline necessarily, but I think there's we'll talk about this later around talking to objections, right? But this is a way for you to collect potential objections that your volunteers might have, or prospective volunteers might have, or even current volunteers might have that will impact their retention, right? And so then we're drafting some headlines. And so here's a sort of a collection of them. We use a pretty consistent format. Again, it's less important what format you use. This is really more food for thought, right? So because I don't know what words your volunteers will use to describe your organization. And so none of this, is just examples, right? And so the first one, make a difference, join our team of compassionate animal advocates today, right? Volunteer with purpose, help, shelter animals find their forever homes, right? Depending, what are, do people talk about it as forever homes? Do they, or is that just something that you use as an industry insider, right? Be the change, volunteer opportunities for animal lovers, right? Join our pack, become a volunteer and transform lives at the shelter. And so you get sort of the idea, right? These are different potential taglines you have for, as a to recruit volunteers. And so, as you're reading this, it's like, oh, do I understand? Oops, double clicking doesn't work. Do I understand what this message is saying? And if not, then I need to tweak it. And then does it, and you can say, you can maybe test this back even to the volunteers that you interviewed, say, hey, does this new message resonate with you, right? And so that is sort of part two, right? Identifying language market fit. And again, we have a little bit of a template in chat that Chloe has put together. And so, please take a look and encourage you all to have this conversation with your volunteers. All right, like I said, we'll dive into one more here in this list of 5. And so providing enough details up front, right? And so one of, a few of the things that we find as kind of low-hanging fruit, right, is making sure to have a clear call to action on your website and within your social media posts. People don't like to think, right? A lot of times you'll see on a website, there's a big donate button. There's often not a big volunteer button, right? And it might be a little bit more hidden somewhere. And so it's important, right? If volunteer recruitment is important, and one of the sort of the first window into your organization is your homepage. Well, if you're not anywhere on there, it makes it very difficult for people to find you, right? And all, or it doesn't prompt new visitors to think, oh, look, there's an opportunity to volunteer, right? So if someone's casually sort of browsing organizations, they might say, oh, I don't see anything. And so just making sure that you have a clear button call to action there. And then related to that, right, is communicating upfront what your expectations are for them, right? And so making sure that if someone's visiting your website, that you're providing clear instructions, information that streamlines that decision-making process for individuals. And also, by the way, makes it more likely that you're going to get, quote unquote, the right volunteers, right? And so if you think about the exercise you're going to take from your persona exercise, the exercise you're going to do with your language piece, right? By having, you know, upfront expectations, right, that sort of fit these groups, then you're more likely to get the folks that you actually want, right? And so this is an example of, you know, maybe a job description template on the left, right? So people understand like, you know, what the commitment level is, anything they need to bring, right? Where is it going to be? All the details that you might want to provide them. Right? And yeah, and Chloe said we'll share this template in our follow-up email tomorrow. Okay. All right, so diving into more tactical pieces here. So we'll talk about recruitment practices and then sort of engagement practices. So there's, oops, let me refresh this real quick. Give me 1 sec. I think once there we go. Okay, I'm gonna reshare that. Give me 1 second. Okay, good. All right, refreshed. So I noticed number 11 was missing there. So best recruitment practices. So these are a few that that we've noted that work well from just our conversation with other nonprofit organizations. You know, maybe some experts in the space. And so talking, you know, partnering with local businesses, right? Lots of, you know, companies, especially if you saw our presentation from last week, and we have a upcoming one with our friends at Benevity. They'll show you that corporate volunteerism has really exploded, right? People really want their companies to be, you know, responsible and sort of involved in their community. And so there's a big opportunity here, you know, with number 2, to partner with local businesses to grow your volunteer core. And related to that, there's, you know, number 3, we have a whole webinar set around, you know, corporate volunteer matching grants, how to find them, how to, you know, who does them and all of that. But it's a way for you to raise more money for your program, but also if you structure your program so that it's easy for these organizations to get involved, right? You know, just make their life easier, right? And so if you're interested, right, we have other webinars that we'll sort of dive into some of those details. But I think, you know, the couple that we'll sort of dive in more details are, you know, one, you know, we have you know, you can use social media more effectively, and again, you know, Julia Campbell, who's an expert here, you know, we have a webinar on her. But today I really wanted to circle back to what we talked about earlier, which is speaking to objections. And so here, one of the things with recruitment that you might find challenging is, you know, volunteers often have reasons why they can't volunteer with you, right? And so it could be time constraint, right? I'm too busy to volunteer. I don't have the skills. I can't afford. I need to work. It might be that, you know, I'm too shy, right? And so and here's some potential responses that, you know, you might have against these objections, right? And so like we offer flexible volunteering opportunities, short term, one time, or it's you know, we don't mind that you don't have the special skill. This is an opportunity to learn more skills, right? And so is understanding what objections folks might have. Two, what responses you could provide. And after you provide these responses, right? And here's kind of a few more objections, fear of commitment, distance, health concerns, responsibilities, is then you can actually proactively in your recruitment practices speak to these objections, right? So you can talk about like, if you notice from prospective volunteers, one of their top concerns is time constraints, then in your recruitment, you can proactively address that and say, hey, we offer different types of opportunities. Some, with our sort of classic, mentorship program requires a commitment of, 12 to 18 months. But, there's other ways to be involved in XYZ, right? That require a lot less time, but are still equally as are still very impactful, right? Hopefully that makes sense for folks. And then one other tip, I guess I have in terms of speaking to objections would just be you can again leverage your volunteers to help you speak to those objections, right? So folks that are already volunteering with you, you can have them talk about some of these potential objections and say, oh, actually, um, uh, you know, I also had a concern around, my health concerns, and maybe they don't want to share what that is. But I was able to still find an opportunity to volunteer here. They're so welcoming, they're super inclusive, and here's how I was able to address this, right? And you can have like a little 15 20-second snippet of video from your iPhone or something that you can use, right? And then so next we'll talk about engagement best practices. And so these are some of them, oftentimes they might be pretty straightforward and you already do these. So please take these as, you all are experts as well, of course, but food for thought, right? So if you're not doing this, maybe consider adding this to your repertoire. Be responsive. This is number one for a reason. We find that both for recruitment and retention, if the more responsive you are, the much more likely that someone is going to actually go through the full process, right? And this is true also, if you think about from a business standpoint, right? I forget the stats for sales, right? But it's something like, if you respond within the first minute, the first 2 minutes, the first 5 minutes, the first 30 minutes, the first hour, your chances of closing that sale as a business is like 2x 3x higher than if you wait even a couple hours or a day, right? People really appreciate that responsiveness. And even if you think about yourselves individually, right? If you're reaching out to something and one company is more responsive than the other, well, you're going to feel like they appreciate you more, they're more excited about you, all of those things, right? It's you know the same, this is sort of broadly applicable for not just volunteering, but also when you're recruiting volunteers, right? Providing clear directions, we already talked about that. Number three is collecting feedback. And I think this is actually one of the biggest missed opportunities for our nonprofits, which is getting timely feedback, right? Immediately after, when folks are volunteering. If you're ever at like an airport bathroom, you'll notice they have the little kiosk that has, how clean were we today? And there's 3 buttons you can tick, right? There's like the sad face or the happy face, and you can quickly even tell the airport staff, right? Hey, do they need to go and check out a bathroom or not, right? Similarly, if you think about if you've ever done, use something like an Airbnb to rent, a room, right? Or if you've ever used Uber to book a ride, all of these organizations are collecting feedback immediately after. And that's important for retention because obviously, if someone's unhappy, you want to make sure you have the opportunity to address that, to get back to them, say, hey, well, what could we do better? What happened? Let me understand. At a minimum, if they get it off their chest, they're less likely to share it with others. And then on the flip side, if you have your really happy volunteers, right, you might reach out to, if they're new, you might reach out to them and ask them if they want to come back, right? You might ask them if they want to quote unquote level up and become a leader, or or to do something, to do more, or maybe to have them bring a friend next time because they obviously like the experience. And so it's an opportunity to really leverage the people that are that are happy with you, and then also make sure that the folks that are unhappy don't sort of spread spread the word, so to speak, right? And then showing genuine appreciation, right? This is kind of a no duh, but talking to them, featuring them, as volunteers. Um, uh, the fifth, number five, again, I think this is somewhat of a missed opportunity oftentimes, is actually asking your volunteers to come back. I feel like a lot of times our nonprofits, they have volunteer programs, but it doesn't necessarily explicitly ask, hey, Gung, will you come back next time, right? And this kind of goes hand in hand with collecting feedback, right? If you can be more targeted towards who you ask as well. And then number six, we can dive into more. We have full webinars around this topic as well, but getting your donors involved, right? Getting them to volunteer, right? They're already invested in your cause. Getting them to also volunteer, right there, it's going to be easier than getting someone that doesn't have any relationship with you. And a lot of folks are worried that, oh, well, if my donors are volunteering, maybe they feel like that's their gift of time and they're not going to give financially anymore, and I don't want to risk that. What I'll tell you is that when we talked to our friends in January from Little Green Light on one of our webinars, they shared with us that the median gift for the organizations where they had in their CRM that had volunteers, and they looked at, hey, donations from people that volunteered versus didn't volunteer, volunteers had a double the average donation amount than the non-volunteers. So getting your donors to volunteer not only increases your volunteer core, but they're more likely to actually give you more, right, financially as well, which also makes sense, right? Because they're going to be able to see and feel, right, the impact in a way that they can't just as donors, right? Number seven is kind of a different idea that we don't see as much of. Again, sort of getting people to pledge to come back more regularly. Again, if they're happy volunteers, can you get them to pledge? Just like if you have a donor do a pledge to say, hey, we'd love to have you back. Would you pledge to come back once a month, right? And then last but not least, of course, invite a friend, right? And so, obviously, we talked about working smarter, not harder earlier. And so, one way to do that is with technology, right? And so we'll just do 30 seconds here to show you how maybe some of this can be done using a platform like Civic Champs. And so with us, we have, application forms and, sort of features, across a full volunteer lifecycle. But what you're looking at right now is our mobile app. And so it allows you to check in really easily. If you click this big check-in button on the phone, you can identify the opportunity that you're at. It allows your volunteers to sort of check in and start logging their time. But more importantly, from a retention standpoint, you're able to collect feedback from them. So this is what we were talking about earlier, right? And so you can have the opportunity for them to collect feedback, indicate whether they're happy or not, and really engage them after the fact. And so, on the backend dashboard, right, you could see, whether someone was happy or not, what comments they have. And so just an example, right, there might be other organizations that also do this, but just kind of food for thought in terms of how you might go about collecting feedback from folks. And then finally, right, we have, on Civic Champs, you can have a profile for your volunteers, right? And you can start making some notes, right? And you can see, as you're thinking about like the persona, right? This also might be a way to collect some details. Maybe you have a questionnaire that you actually ask them to fill out that can give you some, qualitative or quantitative data around, why is it that you volunteer with us, et cetera, right? All right. We're at 42 minutes, so right between 40 and 45 as promised. And so So we're wrapping up. And so I'd love to stay in touch with everyone. If you're interested, that's my email. Our website is civicchamps.com. And then if you want to reach out on LinkedIn, this is sort of my LinkedIn as well. And each of these, I think, in the presentation are hyperlinks, so you can just click on them to reach out. And then we'd love to have your feedback as well. This is something new we've been doing recently, is just making sure that our webinars are sort of top notch. Make sure that be honest with your feedback. And so if you want more details, less details, Gung's a terrible speaker, whatever it is that's on your mind, please do be honest, as that just makes us better, right? And we appreciate it in advance if you're able to do that. And we do act on feedback. And then last but not least, a couple freebies. And so here we'll have a list of different blogs that we've put together over time that can be additional reading, maybe bedtime reading that you can do later this week. And then we have the templates for finding your ideal volunteer persona, and also finding your language market fit for your organization. So we'll have links to both of these, but they're also here in the presentation when we share that out. And then we have some awesome upcoming webinars that we'd love for you to come and join us for. So next week, I'm super excited. I get to bring 7 of my friends, other founders so collectively 8 nonprofit tech companies that we all do various things, right? Some of us are in grants, others are around just collecting stories, digital annual reports, legacy gifts. And we're all going to do like 3 to 4 minute presentations for everyone, just like quick demos. And so if you're interested in what technology out there could be interesting for your nonprofit, please do come. I think this is kind of a great way to get exposure to lots of good companies. They've all been vetted, and some of you may or may not know a man named Jay Love. He was the founder of Bloomerang and eTapestry, and really sort of let's call it a founding father in sort of nonprofit technology. And so he has vetted all 8 companies, including ourselves, of course. And he's on either the board or the advisor and an investor for all of us, right? So you sort of get his stamp of approval. And then on May 16th, we're going to have a presentation around how to recruit and retain Gen Z volunteers. And so if that's a topic you're interested in, please also join us for that. And with that, that's the end of our presentation. I don't know if there's any additional questions. I see a couple thank yous in the chat, so I appreciate that. Everything is, that's great. I'll take words of affirmation if I can get them. So, well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you all joining us. Oh man, now I'm just like I'm fishing for the compliments at this point, I feel like. So, but I do really appreciate you all. Thank you so much for joining today, and hope to see you next week. Thanks, everyone.
I had a question.
Yes.
Sorry. Do you have time for a question still?
Yeah, no, of course.
Okay. So we have what we call a core volunteering. Oh, okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
It seems like maybe not. Okay.
We can hear you okay, Madison.
Okay, now you can hear me. So we have what we call a core volunteering program where we have like additional training and stuff like that for these volunteers. And we ask that they complete a minimum of 8 hours a month in order to stay like in good standing.
Yep.
And I don't know what do I do when a volunteer kind of falls off that and isn't meeting that requirement? I don't want to discourage them from volunteering from us altogether by being like, well, you're not meeting these requirements. How, and obviously there's steps between, them not meeting and kicking them out. But like, how do you best address that in order to keep them as a volunteer, but also like keep those expectations where they need to be for everyone else? Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it totally makes sense, right? Because you don't want to just say like, oh, it doesn't matter, and now everyone else sees that it doesn't matter, and no one does their 8 hours, right? That's no good either.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we've seen is, I think best practice, what I would do is have them you can call it a different program, perhaps, like that sort of carves it out a little bit. And whether you offer it generically or you just offer it to like the few folks that aren't able to sort of meet your requirements, um, you could say, hey, it looks like maybe 8 hours a month isn't working, right? Like tell us tell me a little bit more, right? You might want to take that as an opportunity to learn why. But then offer them this sort of like Rob says, right? Like a different opportunity to transition to a
Mm,
slightly different role. And maybe it's a different type of volunteering. That might be, like this is where virtual volunteering or at home volunteering or, like what we call like micro volunteering could all be different from like what they do today. And that way it feels different from the rest of the group as well. Does that make sense?
okay. Yes. And I feel like that still encourages you to volunteer without being like, well, we're kicking you out.
Right.
And
Right.
I like that idea. Cool.
Yeah, because like,
Okay.
I
Thank
have
you.
two kids. And so, when I had our first kid, obviously my volunteering went drastically down for a little bit. Right. And so you just want to make sure I think it's good for those sort of life
Hmm.
transitions too. Yeah, great question. Thanks, Madison. Anyone else have questions? I didn't see any in chat. Oh, yeah. Will this session be available to show to my volunteer committee? Yes. So we'll have a recording. And so that'll be posted and shared with you all, or when you get that email from Chloe. Yeah, good question, Becky. Any other questions? Okay. All right. 1, 2, 3. All right, no questions. Great. All right, that's it. All right, thanks everyone again. Really appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you all next week.